All right, you guys asked for this video and I'm going to do it, but it's gonna come with a lot of little asterisks. So let's do it. Hello, welcome back to my channel. It is summertime in the garden. I can't believe somehow it's August already. Here in Atlanta, where I garden, school is starting next week. My mama heart is so happy for them to start using their brain again. Don't know where you are, if you guys are preparing for a new school year, but I am very, very thrilled. When the kids are in school, that means I get a bit of my mornings back. I can get out into the garden quickly and sneak away, and I just feel less guilty overall. Anyways, let's get to the topic at hand, which is a video that's been requested. I did a video earlier with my 5 favorite sun-loving perennials. These are the perennials that will look good in the garden for a very long time, that have more than one season of bloom and re-bloom in the garden, that are easy maintenance. I will link the video right here. But in that video, it was also requested that I share 5 plants that I will not be planting anymore in the garden. And I love this, but I have to caveat this video with a few things because I hate knocking on plants. What doesn't work in my garden might be awesome in your garden. So I have to admit the perennials that are on this list all kind of have one thing in common, and that is I was influenced by a gardener that grows in a different area of the country than I grow, and I loved it in their garden. I wanted to recreate that look in my garden. And lo and behold, what grows well in Michigan or Oregon doesn't grow well here in Atlanta. And so I've fallen victim to that many, many times. It's part of the reason why I started documenting my garden and sharing on social media, was just I didn't see many people sharing what they're growing in Atlanta or similar conditions to me. Jim Putnam over at HortTube was the closest that I could find. But even between Georgia and I believe he's in North Carolina, there's a lot of differences. So that's why I started sharing, was just, as I'm figuring things out in my own garden and what's working, what isn't, I could maybe help somebody else. So here I am, here this is. I've shared this before in many, many videos, but this is what I do. And I've kind of learned this the hard way. So what I used to do is get excited about a perennial, go and buy a drift of them, plant them in my garden, and then watch them slowly wither away one by one. I don't do that anymore. I take an extra year to evaluate a perennial, decide if it really does well in the garden, and then I commit to a drift. So if there's something that I'm eyeballing or somebody else is growing that I saw and I'm not quite sure how it'll do because I've never grown that perennial before in the garden, and I don't really see it around in like my neighbors' gardens or my friends' gardens, what I will do is I will buy one. I will buy a single perennial. I will stick it in the conditions where I would likely do a drift. So there will be some holes for the season, but that way I am sure before committing to a drift that this is a plant that will do well in my garden. And instead of blowing $60 on a drift that dies in one season, I'm taking the extra year to evaluate whether or not it will do well. So that's my method. I encourage you to do the same. I encourage you to take anything anyone says with a grain of salt, because even on one street, there could be microclimates where something grows well in my garden or my soil type is a little different versus, a neighbor down the street. So take everything with a grain of salt. But that being said, these are the 5 perennials I will never grow again. Okay, so the first plant that I want to share with you, I don't even have anymore a very sad looking one in my garden. I've now bought 9 different plants. I did 3 rounds of 3 to create a drift in my garden. And every time I kind of planted it in more and more shade. I believe the tag says it can go from full shade to either part or full sun. So a very versatile plant. It just unfortunately has done very poorly in my garden and isn't something that I'm going to try again, and that is lady's mantle. I wish I could show you what it looks like. I'm pulling a few images from other people's gardens that I'm sharing with their permission and tagging them below. They have absolutely beautiful gardens. It is the reason that I bought this perennial and wanted so badly for it to work. I love utilizing ground covers and perennials that can kind of act like a living mulch. Plus, this has a very beautiful bloom and a really nice fuzzy leaf and texture. Broadleaves, when planted next to thin leaves and grasses, just have that beautiful contrast in the garden. And I wanted for this to work so bad, but I'm not gonna buy it anymore because clearly Atlanta, whether it's our heat, our humidity, the clay soil, I'm not quite sure what it is. I couldn't tell you why it died over and over and over again in my garden. But I think I'm done spending money on this perennial, wishing and hoping that it would work in Atlanta. The next perennial is similar. I have finally gotten it to kind of do well. Let me go show you. Okay, I'm kneeling next to another perennial that I probably won't plant in the garden again. It just doesn't seem to thrive here. This is the first time that I've planted this where it's come back. So I would say I put this into the category of surviving but not thriving. This is Brunnera, I believe. Let's see. This one is Jack Frost Brunnera, and it's absolutely beautiful. I love the silvery texture. I am a nut for anything that has this beautiful, bold silver in the garden. In a shade garden, the color silver just pops, and you can see it from anywhere. It's a beautiful, reflective color that draws your eye into a shade garden, and I wish it did better in Atlanta. Again, this is another plant that I was influenced by my northern gardening friends, and it's absolutely remarkable in their garden. In the early spring, it blooms. It has these light blue, true blue forget-me-not colored blooms, and I love blue in the garden, and so I had to try it. This is my second or third round planting it. This is the first drift that's actually come back, but I wouldn't say it is multiplying, happy, and doing well. It is just surviving, and you know what? That is okay, but I wouldn't invest more and keep planting this in the garden. I'm having a plant this, not that moment right now, and I wanted to share with you an alternative for Brunnera if you've tried it in your garden like me and failed. Brunnera, if you give it the deepest shade that you can give it in the garden, it seems to come back. It doesn't thrive or multiply for me, but maybe it does for you. I have mostly speckled shade in the garden or dappled shade, so pockets of sun and shade. And so there are limited uses that I have for Brunnera and a plant that's very sensitive to sun. For me, what I found as a great alternative is Pulmonaria. It is also an early to mid-spring bloomer. It almost kind of re-blooms into late spring if you cut it back a bit and deadhead. It has those silver accents like Brunnera and a pretty broad leaf shape. It's not completely silver, but it still very much catches the light and demands attention in a shade garden. And it's blooming at that time when you're craving blooms after a long winter. So for me, this blooms at the same time as daffodils and any other fall bulbs that I plant. And it's just beautiful. It's so beautiful. The bees are all over it. The pollinators love it because there's not many things that bloom that time of year. And I just can't recommend it enough. It is also semi-evergreen for me. So if we don't have a hard frost that winter, it will stay and it provides some green to look at in the winter time. I guess green and silver. It also doesn't have any issues with clay soil. I didn't amend my soil much before planting. I've divided this plant. It is in a part sun location. You can see I have dappled sun in this area. Now that the sun is back up, you can kind of see the conditions that it's in throughout the day, and it's just done fantastic. Can't say enough great things about Pulmonaria. If you've tried Brunnera and failed, this is a great one to try next in your garden. I think you'll have success with it. Okay, this is the last shady plant that I'm going to talk about, and it's one that I really wanted to do well in my garden. This patch right here is 3 years old, and it's still about the same size that it was when I first planted it 3 years ago. This is Hakanakloa All Gold. I paid a premium for it because not many nurseries carried it at the time, and I think I paid $20 per perennial. And yes, I know that's insane, but I really wanted it. I love chartreuse in the garden, especially in a shaded garden. I'm gonna say it, anything that's bright and light is just gorgeous in a shade garden, and that's the first place your eyes go. And I love the shape of this grass. It kind of starts upright and has a fountain type shape, and it's just something that I really wanted to do well, and it hasn't. This also falls into the category of surviving but not thriving. This should be about double the size that it was. It should be a slow spreader. It's not. It just isn't. I don't think it loves the Atlanta heat. If you are a gardener in the Southeast and have had luck with Hakanakloa, I'd love to hear what variety you're growing, because I might be tempted to try another variety, but Hakanakloa All Gold just isn't doing it for me in terms of performance year over year. This also happens to be a perennial that I have a substitution for, and that is Carex Evergold. Carex is a great one for the Southeast. It is reliable, it comes back year after year, it will multiply in your garden so that, you know, if you just plant a small 5-inch pot, you won't be stuck with just 5 inches of plant for long. But if this Hakanakloa was to not come back, I would be replacing this drift with Carex. And as I'm planning out any other shady spots in my garden, if I need that pop of color and want that chartreuse, I am planting Carex and not Hakanakloa. So if you're planting your garden up, if you have a shady spot, if you're looking for that pop of color that's front of the border and will demand attention, I would recommend Carex over Hakanakloa. If you absolutely have to try Hakanakloa, I'm not gonna hold you back. Like, you do you in the garden. I definitely did me in the garden. And for me, I just wouldn't recommend it as, hello. Once again, Sushi is gonna be in every video. She's my little garden shadow that isn't very lovable or cuddly, but every once in a while will wanna say hi. So, hi, it's good to see you. Anyway, she's gone. But I completely forgot what I was going to say. To summarize it, Hakanakloa All Gold, not my favorite. It is more readily available. I see it sold in more garden centers, so it's easier to find and cheaper to find. Experiment with it. You might have better luck than me, but for me, if I want this same look, I'm going with Carex Everillo. Okay, I absolutely lied. I said that the Hakanakloa was going to be the last shade plant that I talked about, but I totally forgot about the most controversial one that might be on this list. It is a favorite in many gardens, and it's very much a favorite of mine, but I will no longer be spending money on varieties other than caramel that I don't expect to kind of treat like an annual. Heucheras are definitely one of those shade plants in the garden that really do it all. They have gorgeous evergreen leaves. They bloom these beautiful fairy-like blooms. They are absolutely stunning and semi-evergreen, but not all varieties tolerate heat and humidity well. And here in Atlanta, we are all heat and all humidity. So I really am going to be picky from now on which varieties I'm planting. So in my garden, in the South, in high heat, humid environments, caramel is special, and there are other varieties like caramel, but basically the genetics, the breeding of caramel is such that it has parent Heuchera, Heuchera villosa, which tolerates high heat and humidity better and just does better in my climate than other Heuchera varieties on the market. Now, there are so many different Heuchera varieties with really cool colors, really cool variegation, almost polka dots, but in my garden, when I plant it in the soil, oftentimes they will just die overnight one summer day. So they'll be doing really well, they look fine, the next day they've disappeared. I've had conversations with other gardeners in the Southeast that share my same experience. And honestly, heucheras are not at a price point of an annual for me. And so I will only buy heucheras now that have Heuchera villosa lineage in them. So if the genetics are good, I will give it a shot. But if I'm not sure, if I'm not able to quickly Google the variety and make sure that it is a descendant of Heuchera villosa, I'm not going to be buying them to plant them in my garden. That is in the soil only. Heucheras do pretty well for me in containers, and the great thing about them is that they're semi-evergreen. If we don't have a really hard winter, you get to see their beautiful leaves all winter long, and so they're really great in containers. But in the soil, in the ground, I'm sticking with Heuchera villosa parenting only. The last perennial I'll share with you is one that I really wanted to work. I had planted it many times. I had actually never gotten it to bloom except for 1 year. And finally it was at the point of blooming, and then it got rust so bad that it looked absolutely awful. I mean, you could zoom in on the bloom and take a close-up shot and it looked really great. But when you zoomed out, it was so disheartening because I think I tried for 3 or 4 years to finally get a variety to bloom and was disheartened every single time that it died before blooming. And then I finally got one to grow and bloom, and it was awful. It was so bad. The perennial that I'm talking about is actually a biennial, and that is hollyhock. If you have ever looked up cottage gardens or cottage garden inspo on Pinterest, if you just Google search it, you will see hollyhocks in almost every photo. They are pretty much a cottage garden staple, and throughout Europe, they actually grow like weeds and they reseed everywhere and they're all over the streets. And trust me, when I saw that, I mean, livid isn't a good word because we can't control our environments, but I was so jealous because the one time I had grown hollyhock, it was not a success. It was very bad. And to grow a perennial year after year, to finally get one that blooms and then to quickly see it overtaken by rust and died was really heartbreaking. But I learned such an important lesson that year though, and it really changed the way I think about gardening. And that is, if there is a perennial, no matter how much you want to grow it, if there's something that's susceptible to rust or powdery mildew or a disease, and you live in a climate that has a lot of humidity, that has a lot of rust, powdery mildew, planting it is just asking for heartbreak. No matter how much you amend the soil, no matter how much you baby it, nature is going to be more powerful than nurture in this case. And seeing the progression of that hollyhock really made me realize and change the way I think about gardening. If I want a cottage garden vibe, I have to plant things that do well in my conditions, that give a similar look, but they're not going to be the same. The plant list will be different for me for a cottage garden style garden than it would be for somebody that grows in the Pacific Northwest, than it would be that somebody that grows things in New England or in England and Europe. The list is going to be different for everyone, but you can find perennials that give you a similar look. So what I did this year was trial wedding candles verbascum. It is a very tall, upright perennial. It grew taller than my children, which was super fun for them, and gave a similar look. It wasn't the same look, but if you need something that's a tall accent, try verbascum. Another benefit of verbascum, you can buy a seed packet, grow it from seed, and create a drift so much more affordably that you're going to spend less money than you would buying hollyhock variety after hollyhock variety, trying to find one that grows in a condition where it really might flower, it might bloom for you, but then it'll die shortly after because we have a lot of rust, it's humid. We just have to plant things that do well in our conditions as much as we can. So like I said at the start of the video, these are the plants that I'm no longer spending money on in the garden. These are plants that I've bought multiple different times, planted in multiple different conditions, and just had poor luck with. But the caveat is that what works in my garden might not work in your garden. What dies in my garden might thrive in your garden. So really the best thing to do is to talk to gardeners in your area, to take a walk around your neighborhood and see what's doing well and thriving, and to trial perennials, maybe just one at a time before committing to a drift of them. That way you get to really feel out a perennial before going all in with your garden budget and being disappointed. So I hope that was helpful. If you've got any other questions or comments or ideas for videos, I absolutely love doing suggested videos. I am normally just kind of sharing what I'm doing in my garden. So these kind of videos are super fun for me to make, but my brain doesn't naturally think of them. So thank you to the person that suggested this video. This was a lot of fun for me to make, and I hope it was fun and you maybe learned something or you've had a similar experience. I would love to hear if there are other plants in your garden that you just absolutely will not buy anymore and the reason why. Also, if you've got a trick for any of these plants that I've mentioned and you've figured them out, tell me how. Because I'm a glutton for punishment, and if you tell me they've worked like this and that, I might try it one more time. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you haven't already, I would love for you to subscribe and support my channel, and I will see you in the next video.